All right, here we go. So we're here today with Professor Kehinde Andrews. Totally thrilled. So Kehinde, welcome to the Brains and Banter podcast. This is our first recording, and we're totally thrilled to have you. Just absolutely love your book too. It's so powerful and important right now, and I think it's just so honest about the change that is really needed, right? It's absolutely urgent. We need to totally transform the capitalist system, dismantle it, right? So we can start new. So I was in your book, you do talk about, I wanted to use the quotation that I think was really great, that nothing short of a revolution that overturns the very foundations of empire can ever undo the problem of racism, which itself is at the heart of the global political economic system. So one more quotation is perfect. You say, to live in a better world, we have to participate in the overthrow of this one. So I'm just wondering if you can say more about revolution and what that will involve and who that will involve and all of that.
You started with an easy question.
Easy, very easy.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing I'd say straight away is that a revolution isn't what people generally think. So generally people would think it's violence and it's picking up weapons, and that's not what revolutionary processes are about. A revolution is about saying, one, you have to understand the scale of the problem and that it is literally patterned into everything that we do, with everything, the economy, the way things work, the way the politics work. In fact, there was a right-wing critique. The right-wing critique of the book basically is, he's saying racism is in everything, which is true. Racism is in everything. Like, it is actually the glue that holds everything together. And so once you understand that, that means that you can't reform it. It just can't be reformed. And so revolution is simply a process of building something different. The question is, what is that alternative? There are different ways to do it. This book is a prequel to Back to Black, Retelling Black Radicalism for the 21st century, where I argue what the Black radical vision is, which is briefly unified Africa, Pan-Africanism in a revolutionary sense, that says actually Africa is the only part of the world that really can take itself out of the world system because it has everything it needs in Africa, and then you just create a different society. But yeah, it's not about violence and bloodshed. It's just about building an alternative.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good way, because that is what a lot of people associate with the word radicalism too, right? It's sort of associated almost with negativity now, and it's been co-opted. And so I think, yeah, that's really good to have that explanation. I was also wondering too, if you think that the climate crisis and the pandemic are actually helpful in bringing about the revolution, because they pointed out the flaws in the system and how deeply inherently racist systems are. So do you think it's, I mean, obviously it's been devastating and awful, but it's also kind of, would you say it's woken us up a little bit?
I don't know, because the climate crisis in itself is really, like, it seems that even God is a white supremacy. I mean, like, because if you actually look at where the impacts of climate are, it's in the underdeveloped world, even though the underdeveloped world didn't really do anything, it didn't really cause any of the damage. So it's just terrible. It's ironic, or maybe not ironic, but that actually you can see those things play out. And unfortunately, it's actually making it worse, probably, because, you're seeing this impact of climate refugees, which is going to be, it's supposed to be 1 billion climate refugees in the next 100 years, who are then having to flee and being forced to flee. And then where are they fleeing? They're fleeing into the West, and there's deeply problems with immigration policy, et cetera, et cetera. There's actually anything is exacerbating the issue. And unfortunately, the kind of green left haven't really got to terms with this in any real meaningful sense. And a lot of even some of the leftist green ideas about, how do we consume? Let's have soya. Well, soya is terrible for neocolonialism. It's awful if you actually look at the impact that's having, soya production, etc. So I actually think it's made it worse. And I think COVID as well should have shown us what the fault lines are. Yeah. But really, again, if you actually look what's happening in India with the lack of vaccinations, it's just actually, again, I think it's made it worse. And COVID specifically has made it worse because the impact those lockdowns are going to have globally, devastating. I mean, there's no welfare state, there's no furlough if you're on a production line in China, right? Like, you just more poverty. And already 9 million people died from hunger a year anyway. So the poverty caused by the lockdowns is going to be more devastating, in fact, not less.
Yeah, so we're fucked. That's pretty. That's pretty bad.
It
makes me think of. Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just jumping in. I really find it phenomenal and refreshing to hear you speak about systemic racism from a global perspective, because so often I hear people, and often well-meaning white people, talking about systemic racism from a sort of a compartmentalized, American perspective or Australian perspective or British perspective or whatever it is. But it is this completely all-encompassing, and it goes beyond just racism. It's exploitation of not just people, especially people of color, but of the land, of resources, and so the way you're talking, it's just, I find it incredibly refreshing because it doesn't simplify it. Because in a way, I feel when you just hone in on one specific area or nation, you can skate over things too easily, and you don't confront the real issues that underlie the joining, the connector between all of these issues, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean that's what I try to do in the book, is just show you can because there's lots of books that do this, but there's no way to understand racism on a national scale. It's just not possible. It's a global system. In fact, that's what defines the West. It is this global system going around the world and plundering everything. And so there really is no British racism or American racism or Canadian racism. There's a system of racism that plays out differently across different parts. And when you have the global analysis, then it means you have to be radical, basically, because globally there's no doubt things are terrible and they're not really getting any better. Whereas if you look at, like, say Britain, and you've got black professors, I'm a black professor, this is great. Or America, you've got black president. Well, I mean, even on a national level, that's a pretty bad example. But on a global level, we can understand that really is meaningless.
Exactly. It's like, the changes that they've made, for example, this is just one tiny example, like in the Oscars. Like, that's great. That's great that you have to have all of these rules now in order to get for an Oscar to be nominated. It's crazy to think that we need those rules in the first place, but that's fine. That's another separate issue entirely. But have we not thought of the fact that distribution, America still controls and what we are able to see, and that there is actually still a category that's like world films or world music, like that is like anything outside of America, the UK, maybe Western Europe at a push, like that's, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's very true. Like, so I mean, I don't want to say like don't challenge the small things because they're important, but put them in the context, right? Like, we have to see what and racism is a matter of life and death, right? It isn't. Well, it is the smaller things, but those smaller things should always be connected to the bigger thing. But we often miss the point when we look at the nation, especially when we're in these Westerns, because basically the biggest divide today is: do you live in the West or do you not live in the West? That's it. That's the biggest divide. And if you don't, your life chances are, I mean, it's just so different that it can't even be compared.
And how do you define the West for people like me who don't know anything?
So the West is, so the reason I use the West, and people are somewhat different, is I use the West because take Europe in 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, it goes westward, and that Europe going west kind of unlocks everything. So America is certainly like the kind of the seat of the West. Canada, the places where white people go, the places where white people go, basically. Australia, development. I mean, other part, the West has become a bit more diverse now. So Japan would be counted as the West. It's industrialized, it's developed, capitalist economy. It's in all the the OECD. South Korea, another example. China, not at all. China's a whole different story. Like, it's just not really what pretends to be. But yeah, the West is those advanced, developed economies, which are kind of based on that European expansion
model. Sort of followed that model.
They followed that path,
quote unquote, successfully.
Yes,
in a way.
Exactly.
So yeah, you talk about like the non-white West in the book too, right? And how China has sort of exactly just taken on the Western personality or something. Yeah, and
the model. That model is really important, because then even if you have countries which aren't, like if China does become part of the West, which parts of it are, and this is also interestingly, you could make the case that some people in China are kind of in the West because of their wealth, because of, look at some of the cities. We could certainly make the case that, like, if you go to Brazil, I went to Brazil recently, like the center of Sao Paulo, that seems pretty West. It's all white people. It looks a lot like Paris, right? But actually, like most people in Brazil, you would say they don't live in the West. Actually, you make the same case in America. If you go to North Philly, some of the ghettos, that's definitely not the West. I mean, that's underdeveloped world. So yeah, even then, within the different
definitely
nations,
the same in Australia as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, I also, sorry, you were talking about, before I forget, about like the globalized racism. And I was also, there's this book I wanted to talk to you about by Todd Dufresne called The Democracy of Suffering. And he brings in something that you argue against so powerfully. And I see it too. So he argues for the globalization of empathy, and argues, like many, that like the pandemic has been the great leveler. Mary Shelley even makes that argument in The Last Man, which is about a pandemic or a plague that destroys all of humanity, and talks about this democracy of suffering. But then you note in your book how this is actually like quite delusional, right? That this isn't the great equalizer. And I'll let you go on, but I thought that was a really good point that you made.
No, that's what. I'm not sure how it's more equal. It's less. If anything, it's less equal, right? I mean, this has shown us the inequality, but it's just made it worse in terms of global equality. Certainly, in terms of seeing how states have reacted. I mean, it's really fascinating to see. More people died last year of COVID, and will die every year of COVID, of poverty. Every year, like 9 million people died from hunger, and we don't really do anything. Nobody really cares, right? But when you have that kind of level of death that comes into the West, it's shut down, locked down, everything's double closed. Like our government's really right wing reactionary, and is acting like communism, like proper, like to see, like when white life is threatened, to see what happens, and see the concept, and then. Also importantly, as I said before, the consequences of these lockdowns, I've never heard anybody talk about this. The poverty that's going to push down the chain. I mean, this is devastating. But we're getting not a consideration that we were thinking about. And then even if you look at the vaccine access, things like that, again, it shows you the problem. Pandemic. I mean, healthcare generally, the idea that anything to do with healthcare would be a great leveler shows the ignorance that we're starting point from. Because healthcare is one of the key ways in which you can see white supremacy laid bare. So, for instance, I think one of the examples I give in the book is this vaccine thing, where it was supposed to be impossible to get a vaccine within 2 years, and they were like, 8 months, 9 months, all of a sudden, magic vaccine. Whereas malaria, which kills 500,000 children a year, it just happened to 90% be African and the other 10% be Indian. Yeah. There's been like 100 and something years we've known about malaria, no vaccine. Because they don't care. I guarantee you, if there are 500,000 white children dying from malaria, there would be a vaccine very, very, very quickly. So healthcare just shows you the way that white supremacy works.
Yeah, it makes
in a very blunt way. Would you say it's because there's no money in it?
Yeah, well, it's two ways. One is there's no money in it, but there's no money in it because of underdevelopment, right? Because you've impoverished the parts of the world. And two, they just generally don't care. Like if COVID-19 hadn't come into Europe, there'd be no vaccine. We wouldn't really get it.
But if COVID-19 was like killing, for example, cancer, no cure there yet. But there's too much money being made, right? And not enough money being lost from people dying of cancer. So no one gives a shit. No one cares.
Yeah,
but I agree with you completely that we have this, I hear this, we don't care about anyone who doesn't look or sound like us. There's definitely that, but there is a fundamental link between capitalism, the making of money, and the exploitation of human beings. And
can I just add, capitalism, colonialism, same sides of one coin, two sides of one coin, when you think about it, right? So like they come hand in hand, right? So like when we talk about accessibility to like resources, whether it's a vaccine or even goddamn clean drinking water, right? COVID has, like, if we look at Canada, the populations that have been affected the most have been the indigenous populations and the marginalized people. So people of color, BIPOC people, right? And it's because biggest thing when COVID started was social distancing, staying at home, staying safe, not working. But who can do that? People who can afford it. Rich white people, people in a higher class, people living on reses don't have that as an option. They're living in crowded homes, they're forced into these areas, and then they don't even have accessibility to like clean drinking water. They don't. So it's like, that's like something that like is like on a smaller scale. I was actually going to ask you a question. I'm sorry, Anna, I completely cut you off. I wanted to say,
I apologize.
well, what do you think that like we, as like, obviously you're an academic, and like I'm a sociology student, so I study all of this. Like I can obtain the knowledge, I understand it, at least I'm learning it. How do you break down things like globalized racism, globalization, capitalism, all of these issues to the average person? Like, how do I explain that to my parents? How do I explain that to a person on the street? Because obviously these issues are just as relevant and is just as important to be discussed in an everyday conversation, because they affect us. Because, it's more than just a social media post. It's more than just a textbook. It's happening and it's real.
Yeah, one thing I usually do in talking to people is to take a map of global inequality, like GDP, gross domestic product per capita, and you map it out across the world. And it's the West, it's the white countries, right, which are the richest. It's so-called sub-Saharan Africa, which is the poorest. And then there is this hierarchy in between. If ever you needed to just visually see white supremacy, that's what it is. And then ask people to explain why this is, why does this happen? Why did this come to be? And if there's no other explanation, right? This is white supremacy. And if you look at within Canada, look within the United Kingdom, within Australia, again, look at income inequality, look at poverty, look at those rates of it. You'll see it's very clearly mapped onto race. And then how else do you explain this? Although we don't tend to explain it in those terms, it boggles the mind, because one of the things that we're supposed to be promised with the West and science and that is about in sociology, what do we call it? We call it empiricism, right? That you can see, like, we look at stuff and then we go, look, there it is. Well, look, there it is. It's clear as day, really. We just prefer to ignore it.
I think you've like brought up a good point, Naz, about like, how do we break this down to people? And how do we make people understand such broad concepts like racism in itself? Like, so many people throw around these words and don't actually fully understand what they're talking about. And actually, in a lot of ways, I've seen more harm done than good by that, because they get into discussions and don't have the means to describe, or don't have the knowledge to describe oftentimes personal experience within that system. And it's really awful, because it turns into debate about this mashup between people's lived experiences that are awful, and often, especially for people of color, and the history and the sociology and the philosophies as well behind this. That I think you also talk a lot about the Enlightenment, and how there's a whole bunch of people thinking that they were doing this amazing thing for the world, but actually, jokes on them, not so amazing. But yeah, I guess I'd love to keep delving into this, like fleshing this out a bit more, because it for me, it's so clearly part of the issue. Is, you mentioned earlier on, the first step is understanding, second step, dismantling, overhaul. But we are totally still at understanding globally. I think we're not yet at a point where we can dismantle, because there's so much confusion, so many people feeling like, so many, like people in the most rural parts of Australia, white people who feel attacked by this because they don't understand. If they understood, they would not feel attacked, because it's not an attack, because they are just as much effed over. They are effed over by capitalism. They don't win out of racism. They don't lose, but they don't win, because if a system doesn't work for all, then it doesn't work for anyone. You know, that's what I think. If there's someone being left behind, if there are 9 million kids, that's not 9 million kids, but if there are that many kids dying of malaria, how are we winning globally? How are we collectively winning? We're not. So, yeah, let's.
But that's the thing about the West. This is where I always push back on the term identity politics. And the West is based on identity politics. It's based on its identity of whiteness that says that the we, as white people, we don't really care about everybody else. And as long as white people do the fine, we're not bothered, right? And that is such a strong thing which underpins how we can just keep on going on with this world, which is so terrible, really. Like a child dies every 10 seconds because they don't have access to food. Almost all of them are black and brown, like that. But we just kind of carry on with it because we have these kind of underpinned by this idea that as long as the West is fine, it's all right. We don't have to worry about the rest.
This is what I want to say as well. Like, they are not fine. This is not working. There might be lots of wealth and lots of people in lots of nice houses talking about a lot of nonsense that doesn't make sense, like investments and banking and international economics. You can tell I'm out of my depth here. But like, you know, the white man is utterly depressed and suicidal, and yet he is the one who has arguably most privilege and is winning. So not winning, you know, and not, it's like this philosophy that we adapted is actually destroying us.
Well, that's when like the idea kind of like of alienation kind of comes in. We're losing our sense of humanity, you know, and a big reason behind that is capitalism. And once again, capitalism, colonialism, same shit, you know, that we're losing like what we are, and like the Western world kind of forces you into that whole 9 to 5, like this is the ideal lifestyle and this is how you're supposed to do it, you know. And it only that like achievable lifestyle is actually only really achievable for the white man, but even that lifestyle isn't like the lifestyle that was meant, right? But then again, what is really meant, because there was so many different forms of life and the way that we lived, you know, before like all of this. And like, I don't know, like I think that, you know, when you look at the Western world, I don't know, maybe you guys would disagree, but like there's the whole like, I don't know, maybe I feel this way because I'm a first generation Canadian, but the idea of not really knowing where home is, not really understanding and knowing where you fit, because it's like, I don't belong here because this world is meant for a white guy, a straight white male, you know what I mean? But like, that's not me. And functioning in that world can be difficult. It can be like harsh. And it's not just like you said, it's also the suicidal, depressed white man as well, right? It's like the whole, like we're losing our sense of being because it's all about work, it's all about production, it's all about consumption, you know, and that's all it is. We're just repeating a cycle, a vicious cycle.
And those things aren't human, like you say. Those things aren't human. So as a first gen Canadian person, you're alienated instantly. And the world and, you know, the system, the people who this system is designed for, it fits them. Sure. But by buying into it, they are selling their humanity. They're giving up their humanity in order to do that. Still, there is an act of saying, because that's the only way I can see all of this whole picture fitting in together, you know.
I think I want to hear Kehinde speak, but I just wanted to fit in one quick thing too. Sorry, we're all talking, and but it also makes me think of Joel Bakken's The New Corporation documentary, in the former one, where he describes the capitalistic system, corporations, as like a psychopath, right? And that's exactly what the West has become this psychopathic personality where we just want to get ahead. Doesn't matter that we've gotten here on the backs of oppressed people, right? So it's like the whole system itself, like you say, Kehinde, the capitalist system is racist, right? And America is racist, so you can't sort of have a sort of freedom from that until the capitalist system is ended. So yeah, I just also wanted to know, like you mentioned that, that like token gestures just aren't enough, like improved hiring practices are good, but that's not going to make a change. And like the thing you mentioned about L'Oreal and changing, like getting rid of fair on skin lightening cream. Like, so what do you think, like, what are the big changes that we are necessary, and how do we, another easy question for you, like, how do you envision that change happening?
Yeah, so this is where, like, well, it's on one part of me, I don't think you're going to get the changes that are necessary. Aren't just going to happen because the changes end everything, right? So whoever argues for their destruction, I mean, essentially what you're saying is, if we say, like, if you had, like, so for instance, it's relatively simple. Like, if we say, what's the problem is that it's about the distribution of wealth and exploitation, right? And you say, well, actually, let's just distribute that wealth much more fairly. So we pay sweatshop workers, what, $1 a day? Stop paying them $1 a day. Maybe pay them a proper wage, right? That would be a good idea. Or pay proper resources. Let Africa own its own resources and make the wealth from the resources. It sounds simple, right? But if you were to do that, the whole economic system would collapse overnight. Literally would collapse. So in some ways, I don't know that the system can repair itself. Which sounds a bit negative, but again, it's not really, because it's a prequel to Back to Black, which is the idea that says, look, we just have to, if you want those revolutionary ideas, you have to build them, and you have to fight for them, and you have to organize them. Honestly, I just can't see any situation where the state or the major institutions are involved in making the changes that are needed, because they would end all of them. They would literally end themselves, right?
Exactly. I guess that's why you say, like, the West isn't going to take up the cause, and it's going to be the oppressed groups, I guess, right, that actually need to bring about the change. And are there ways, do you think, like, I know the academic institutions are also racist in many ways, and so do you think academia itself has a role to play? Do you think there can be changes in, like, teaching, like, if people start teaching? Have you taught your book yet, by the way? I guess it came out in 2021. I'm so excited to teach The Age of Empire.
Yeah, I mean, I teach all the time. I mean, just before it was a book.
Right, of course.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, you can do that. So it's within spaces, and what we've done at the uni is we've kind of colonized the university. So we've taken a space and changed it. But more broadly, the uni is a part of the problem. So the uni is one of those institutions that just needs to go away, unfortunately. The one hope, this is the one hope, which I don't know if it came across as a hopeful thing in the book, because it was meant to, but when at the end of when I sent in the manuscript, and the editors were like, you need to be a bit more positive at the end. So the bit that I added, which I don't think it was more positive, in my head it was positive, but it came out negative, was that, well, actually, if you look at this way of producing is actually psychopathic, it actually is exhausting the world. It actually is going to, if we just carry on like this, the world will stop. It'll kill everybody on the planet. Like, that's how little sense it makes. So the one hope is that there is an epiphany there that says, well, look, we're about to annihilate everybody, including ourselves. Maybe we need to rethink how we do this and rebuild a fairer economy. Again, I'm not sure it's going to happen. And actually, unfortunately, a lot of the things you'll see from people like Jeff Bezos is, let's go to the moon, or, let's go to space. We just exhaust this planet and then go find Mars and go and exhaust that planet. So unfortunately, it's not happening so far, but maybe eventually that's kind of the one thing that will make a radical rethink of where we're going.
Well, I think it's, sorry, go ahead, Anna.
I just said, let him go.
Yes, exactly. Get them out of here. We'll start fresh.
But imagine that. But imagine. I listened to this podcast about it. Imagine you got all that money. He's richer than most countries in Africa, actually, which is crazy, right? And you want to use your money to help humanity, and you don't say, well, actually, there's really loads of poor people. Let's do something on Earth. You actually say, no, let's go build in space. Like, I don't know what to say.
Totally. Yeah. And then who is it taking over all of the, is it Bill Gates, all the land? Vandana Shiva talks about this, like, the land in India for farmers, he has like the majority of that land. And it amazes me, that like 1%, I feel like could bring about that radical change if they weren't a bunch of assholes.
Well, the problem is they get their wealth from that system, right? So.
Absolutely. What are you going to say, Kenny?
Yeah. Like it's equivalent to like a dragon sitting on like a pot of gold or whatever, like a big thing of gold, like it's guarding it.
Yeah,
they're not doing really anything with it.
Really,
they want to go to the moon because they fucked us over here on Earth. That's literally, think about it. They're like, you know what? We fuck shit up here. Let's go over there and let's go deal with it. Because they're literally just running away.
Yeah,
I absolutely. But they will be then nothing without the people holding up their system, and that is where the positivity lies. Because I sometimes think we think that there's just like a bunch of men like just sitting up above everyone going, yes, I'm going to keep this system the way it is. But actually it's a collective that holds that in place, and we each individually buy into that every day that I put my earpods in. I'm buying into that. Every day that I turn on the news and believe for a second that, I don't know, every time I watch the news and I'm just listening to them talk about the monarchy, or whatever, like I clean my house, I have this urge to be productive. There's all of these things that it's just so deeply ingrained in us. And I wonder where to start.
That kind of
really
goes back to like the point of how like that's where revolution and the power in the masses comes out, right? A teacher has so much power. We walk into a classroom, we sit, we open our books, we're quiet, and that's like an unsaid rule. No one's telling us sit, behave, but we do it. But if a whole classroom were to get up and leave, that teacher's power, gone. You can't have a classroom without a class, right? And when you think about it, like you said, they need us. And if we get together and we revolutionize and we create change as the masses, as like now there's allyship and there's, there is a conscious awakening happening around the world, right? And as that happens, change will come. But we're just like in the works of it right now.
It must also come down to like, if the Enlightenment was this idea that rationalism is the way forward, you talk about school, there is a hierarchy at school about what is important and what is not. There is if you're doing science and maths, you are intelligent and you run the world. But why, why? Economics, yes. Theater, no. Like I literally, when I was in my, I'm not sure if it's the same for you guys, when you choose your subjects at school, they sat me down and said, no, you cannot choose 3 arts. You must have 2 sciences because you've got whatever this grade. Like, no, I don't
That also
care
ties into
about
the Western, like what is qualified as like knowledge and like good knowledge and education,
wisdom,
right? Exactly. Like when you think about it, so many countries and so many cultures value art way more than they value science or like anything else, or like at least equal. Yeah, exactly. Right. Like I don't know. Like I kind of think of it like I'm South Asian. I'm Punjabi. Art is a huge part of our culture, right? And obviously coming here and being, colonized and just tied into the system, that changed for a lot of us. But like luckily my family was really tied to that, so I grew up valuing art. But I have so many peers that don't understand that, but they're from the same cultural background as me. But because of being in the Western world, we're told that this is like Western medicine, for example, it's not that great. I stand by that. It's not that great.
And actually, this like ties into a lot when we're talking about COVID and stuff, and death, and like how this has become, and this might be a bit of a touchy subject, but it's like we have a very unhealthy relationship to death, like extremely unhealthy relationship to death because of centuries of avoiding it and avoiding talking about it. We shove our old people away. No, like let's not confront death now, but we'll keep them alive for as long as we can, but let's like not have them near us because we don't want to be like aware of our own mortality. This is I think somewhere in this is the crux of the issue, and probably the thing that ties all of this together. It's like we have an ideology, the West has an ideology, a philosophy, a hierarchy of importance of things that they define as important that we have put on top of the rest of the world, like a Play-Doh cutter. You know, we've tried to cut people into the right size to fit, and we've you know, I don't know why I'm saying we, but I am a part of it. We all are in some way. Those who live in the West, those who interact with the West, and it's somehow dismantling those individual ideas. What is important? What do we value? You know, is it more important that someone stays alive really long, or is it more important that we have connection? You know, up until the point of death.
Yeah, but that's what you see across the world. It's like, and even like China, and if you go to like East Asia, the culture of some of the annihilation of the West is there as well. Like you can see it, like in the way that people dress, the way that people talk, in the movies they're watching. There is the West isn't just about economic domination. It has been. It is cultural domination as well, and you can see that spreading. And that's that's probably the ultimate thing, because you don't need violence anymore. That's even the key thing about the new age of empire. You don't need violence anymore. It perpetuates itself, and the large way it does that is through culture.
That's a very interesting point.
That made me think sort of, Kehinde, about your idea too, that like how awful complacency is, and that being comfortable in the capitalist system is the most dangerous thing, because then you're not going to have the ability to change, because like you said, you're benefiting from this racist system. So I was wondering what you think about that. And also if you've had sort of slightly off like student responses, any useful ones, like when you teach this sort of thing, if you notice sort of like a sense of like change or transformation in your students at all.
Because I think this is one of the things about what happened. If you think about the new age of empire and what defines it differently than the old age. The old age was very much lots of violence, very top down, and then actually Malcolm X, who I always quote anyway. So that Malcolm X talked about how that kind of came to a head. It couldn't last forever. One, Europeans kept fighting each other, and you have the two wars. Really importantly, people resist all around the world are picking up arms and saying, "No, this isn't going to happen anymore." And so what happens is the European empires pass the ball to America. America becomes like the center of empire and has this benevolent imperialism, what Malcolm calls it, benevolent colonialism, where it's, that's why America loves to pretend like it's a revolutionary state and wonderful independence and the land of the free and all that nonsense. Because it pretends that it's different. It's this new iteration, the UN, the World Bank, the IMF, all these institutions, which are trying to help the world, but actually they're just making it worse and worse and worse. And then also in the US, you get that heavy cultural domination as well. So Hollywood and all that stuff and the westernization, and so what's happened is essentially America's really just made everybody feel a bit better about imperialism in many ways, right? We don't even call it imperialism anymore, even though that's exactly what it is. And then a big part of that is, after the Second World War, you get, I think people, they realize that you can't just carry on oppressing. You have to give something. And so independence across the underdeveloped world, race relations here and in other parts of the world as well. So it's opened up a little bit enough. So you have people like me, you have people like Successful, you have people who you can look and say, "Oh, it's fine. What's the problem?" So it's all, you can feel British and you can feel Nigerian, whatever. You can feel part of it. And that's the worst possible moment to be in, because you're still being exploited, but you don't understand you're being exploited. And worse than that, you're like fanfare in the system, which isn't what you do in the first place. And that's why universities are so bad, because universities are such, the access to education or schooling is such an important part of that. We can all go into school, we can all go into university. You can come from Nigeria and go and learn how to destroy your economy doing international relations in a British university. And so we all feel part of it, right? We all feel, and the other thing we feel is there's no alternative. Like, this is it. Like, there's nothing else. So and this is a big thing we're trying to, the major difference, and why I say we're probably worse off now than we were 50 years ago, is 50 years ago, because we weren't in it. So I wouldn't have had this job. Probably wouldn't have had any job. I definitely would have been a professor, wouldn't have been a professor. This wouldn't have happened. Because we weren't in it, and because the conditions were still, like the transition to the new age of empire, really, in the undeveloped world, everybody understood, like, and everybody resisted, and everybody's like, nah, this has got to go. But now I have to have the argument, no, white people, black people, like, come on, like, understand, this ain't good. Even not just here as well, across so I've been lucky enough to travel around. You see the same kind of faith in this system in places where I simply can't believe you would have faith in the system, because it should be really, really, really obvious that it's terrible. But you can still, if they've done a really good job, really training everybody into thinking that. I think in terms of students, I'm trying to think in terms of students, because I've been lucky, because Black studies students are different. Like, they come, like, already. It's a bit different. I haven't had any challenging. I'm trying to think. Have I had any? No, that's what we have actually. So we have a different, like, so what we have with our students sometimes, we have people who have very set ideas, which sometimes can be a bit problematic, right? So in fact, Back to Black, I did a lot about this on cultural nationalism and some of the misogynistic ideas, and the role of the gender roles of that. We do have people coming with very clear, like, this is what it is, and it does take a minute to break that down and say, well, actually, let's understand how that homophobia really, that's not an African thing, that's a European thing, which has been incorporated into how you believe what Africanness is. It always takes a long time for this, but if you expose people to stuff and give them discussion and we talk about stuff, you'd be surprised to have people change eventually, right? It's just, people, as long as people's hearts are in the right place, it's usually fine.
Yeah, exactly. Just need the knowledge. It also made me think of how, like, you talk about, like, the Southern wolf, like Trump, where there's that overt racism versus it was the Northern fox, right? Like Biden, where it's almost more dangerous, similar to the idea of being caught in the system, because you start to feel like it's sort of this sneaky, subtle racism that you don't notice as much. So I was wondering if you could say more about that too, and how that affects us too, and how Trump's racism is almost less detrimental to that subtle form of it. I don't know if I have that right.
Malcolm again talks about the Northern fox being, he says so the Southern wolf, he actually said he prefers the Southern wolf because they bare their teeth in a snarl. They're not your friend. You just fight them, right? Because it's a wolf. Whereas with the Northern fox, bears their teeth in a smile, pretends they're your friend. You're still getting eaten at the end of the day, but you feel like you go along with it. You go to dinner and you end up being dinner, right? And he's saying, well, actually, he much prefers and he's talking really about the South in America is that's the Trump kind of racism that is over. And if you actually think about the mobilizations that happened, in fact, you can't really prove this, I think. When you think about the scale of the Black Lives Matter protests under Trump, it's not a coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence it's Trump's there, because Trump's such a bad guy. He's a villain. You can see it. You can understand it. It's just really clear. Whereas there were Black Lives Matter protests under Obama, no doubt about it. In fact, Black Lives Matter starts under Obama. But it don't catch the imagination in the same way. And a big reason is that because Obama, right? Obama's a fox. Obama's terrible. Even though Obama's black, he's still a fox. If you think about all the indicators for African Americans in America from the 8 years he was in charge, they all got worse. The only one that got a bit better was employment. So there was the employment gap got a bit lower, but then if you drill down into that was a complete mirage, because the jobs people were getting were non-jobs, which weren't paying them. And actually food stamp usage went up by about 111% for African Americans under the black president. And that's the book with the most startling stat I've ever read about America is Keeanga Taylor's book, From Black Lives Matter to Black Liberation, where she's saying that in New York City, of all the black people who are employed, so half of all black people who have jobs in New York City work in fast food restaurants. I mean, that is a step. When I read that, I had to read it like 3 times. That can't possibly be true, but that's how bad it is. And in like Chicago, it's like a third. Philly, it's like 40%. They say, yeah, you'd have a job, but it's a terrible job that doesn't pay you. And that's under the black president. So if I'm going to say where are we better with Trump or better with Obama, I'd say better with Trump because at least people know, right? They're resisting. And Biden, if you think Biden's a solution to racism, but they literally lost your mind. That man's terrible.
Another old white guy. No thanks.
No white guy who's just terrible at race. Like his history is awful, and they only picked him because he's a white guy. That was literally why they picked him.
So frustrating.
It's the same as but is it? Do you think it's possible not to have? What's the fox called? What's the type of fox?
The northern fox.
The northern fox. Sorry, yeah. Is it possible to Is it possible to not have one within the current system? Because ultimately they'll just be a puppet. It doesn't matter what they themselves stand for in a lot of ways. There's going to always be limitations because
that's just politics.
Money talks.
Yeah.
And those with money, their priorities are set pretty clear.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. Like, my mom doesn't like it when I critique Obama. She takes it quite personally, but it's not a personal thing. Like, it could be anybody.
No.
The president of the United States.
It could be me. It could be you.
Yeah,
it could be you and me.
Same thing. That's the point. The president, like, so certain roles, even professor is one of those roles. Actually, I have to say, like, which are actually just by their nature anti-black, right? And there's nothing you can do about it if you're in that role. That's just the truth.
I also was really interested in, since we were talking about Malcolm X and the Black Panther Party, like sort of the influence for you, and especially in regards to prison reform, not even reform, but the ending of prison systems, and same with police, the ending of the police system, and trying to just start fresh with that. Do you have, as Malcolm X, as I could tell, has been a strong influence? Would you feel comfortable talking about that a little bit?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think the Black Panthers probably make the clearest statement ever. Like in their 10-point platform of the Black Panther Party, they talk about they want the release of all political prisoners. And by political prisoners, they just mean black people in prison. It's not like they said actually being black in prison means you are a political prisoner because you haven't had a fair trial because of the way the system is, the conditions are set up against you anyway. That's not to say there aren't some bad black people, of course there are. But I think this is kind of one of the first real clear articulations of abolition. And they're saying actually the system itself is the problem, right? And actually how we even think about jail and incarceration and the court system and the police system and how we think about, right? Even how we think about crime, right? I mean, selling crack is a crime, right? But is it a worse crime than think about the Wall Street crash? Like nobody got that didn't seem to be a crime. Crashing the whole entire economy and costing people their livelihoods and their jobs. That wasn't a crime, right? But the impact of that is way isn't
their lives.
Drugs, right? It's people talking about life and death, especially the cascade down to the underdeveloped world that had. I mean, the financial crisis killed if you did a study of this, it would be millions as responsible, and nobody, not one person has been punished. Whereas you're getting a custodial sentence for buying recreational drugs, right? But it's insane. So you really have to rethink what is the purpose of this system. And the interesting thing about the Panthers, that's before mass incarceration. That's like the American system, which looked a lot like our system, where it's disproportionately black, but there's not a crazy amount of people. And it's only got worse since then because America now incarcerates ridiculous amounts of people.
Do you believe that, well, I believe this. I just want to know if this is even like valid. I think that the prison system in America and in Canada is literally just a form of modern slavery and modern institutionalized racism at its play. Yes, okay, there are white people in prison, but it wasn't made for them. You know what I mean? It wasn't built for them. When after slavery ended in America, right? The prison system all of a sudden was a way to have slavery legalized, basically. That's what it is. And then to this day, it stands that way. And then when the war on drugs hit, it was just once again another way to criminalize marginalized individuals, specifically Black people in America.
100%. I mean, prison generally is massively classed, so it's generally about poor people. What crimes do poor people do? We're going to put you in prison. And certainly, yeah, in America and Canada and in Britain as well, that racial element can't be ignored. I mean, it's not coincidental that the 13th Amendment keeps slavery in prison, and then they round up loads of black people afterwards and put them in prison. And that in fact, that's the only comparable labor to sweatshop labor is prison labor, right? Which is a growing part of the economy. Something that there's a website. It's a Unicor. I think it's unicor.org or something like that. UNICOR, which is and if you look at it, it just says "Made in America." We can do all these services for you. You have to click quite a few times to work it. This is actually from prison, the prison labor business. This guy is really bad, and it's actually getting worse when you look at privatization, mass, and because they've incarcerated so many people there. It's difficult to imagine them letting people out because it's such an important part of how they produce wealth.
They let them out knowing that they'll reoffend. That's the thing. It's not designed to stop them from reoffending. Because if it was, they'd have it would be a supportive process. It's not. Incarceration is anyway.
Yeah, no, 100%. And actually, you can make a strong argument, particularly in the States, that mass incarceration really is what welfare looks like for black people. Like, they don't want to spend money on welfare, so they spend money on prisons. And the society is much happier with spending more money arresting people than decent welfare payments.
There are individuals that will go to prison in order to get access to healthcare, in order to get access to food, in order to have a place to sleep. That's literally what the system has driven people to. And like you said, they let people out knowing that they're just going to end up back in because that's what they want, right? If they wanted them to leave prison and reassociate themselves into society as this, ideal person, they would do the things in prison to help them in that, and they don't do anything to help them. They don't do anything to address their physical, emotional, financial, any needs whatsoever. They don't do anything. So it's once again the prison system is literally just an easy way to continuously drive their agenda.
Good point. It's also the idea you're saying, the system itself is insane. And it makes me think of, I'm in the midst of creating a collection on intersex and the health and medical humanities. And there's a new area of study called MAD studies. And it's exactly the idea that the system is what's insane, whereas the system makes intersex individuals feel like they're crazy for wanting to keep their, extra genitalia or something, when what is crazy is the system they're stuck within. So again, let's dismantle the system. But you guys are making such brilliant points. I also want to ask, it also speaks to obviously we're talking about this intersectionality of poverty and race and over incarceration, lack of housing. All of that is all intimately tied. Is that what you would say too, Kehinde?
100%. There's actually my wife came up with this when we were doing a workshop with Kimberly Crenshaw on intersectionality. And she was like, white supremacy basically is the roundabout. Do you have roundabouts? It's an English thing, like a rotary, I think you say in the States. I don't know. Do you say
we have them?
Yeah, roundabout. And all these other roads lead through it, but you really can't disconnect any of them from each other, and certainly not from white supremacy, which is the kind of thing which holds all of those things together. So it plays out differently through gendered ways, across sexuality, disability. The roundabout really is white supremacy, which everything goes.
That's such a good analogy. Your wife sounds very smart and cool.
Well, I'll put one last question to you, and this is, in a world where there are still wolves, we're talking about foxes and wolves. There's still wolves out there who are fervently protecting their territory. What would this do for them? What would overhauling this? And I'm talking about lower class, working class white man. I see them as being the ultimate wolf because they feel fucked over by the system, excuse my language. They feel completely fucked over, and they always mention this, well, I haven't had privilege thing. How will changing this, overhauling this system, benefit them?
Yeah, well, there's two answers.
Because it will, I think.
Yeah, there's two answers. One answer is that well, the same people who are oppressing black people generally, no, they're the problem, right? So if you think about, particularly if you look at over the last 40 years, what's the major problem been? Neoliberalism, right? It's been that Jeff Bezos somebody can have that much money, which is ridiculous. That somebody shouldn't be able to have that much money. There used to be much better tax regimes, that tax the rich, that put the money back in, that built social democracy. So you didn't necessarily have those edges. So there is an argument that says, well, yeah, look, that's the goal is let's tax the rich again, return to that, distribute the wealth better. Certainly. The problem with that argument, though, is, my parents came to this country in social democracy, and it was just as bad then as it is now. And actually, part of that social democracy thing is within the West, the conversation is how do we share out the spoils of empire? We should share them out fairer, but it doesn't necessarily lead to let's share them out across the entire globe, right? So if we're thinking about the bigger picture, I mean, I think genuinely there's enough stuff in the world for everybody to live like a decent standard of living, right? There just is. There just is. And if you had a revolution which made that possible, it would make. I don't know if your average white person's life here would improve dramatically, but it certainly wouldn't get any worse, right? It'd be like, this it's possible, and it would be preferable. I would imagine, maybe.
Yeah, no, I thank you for that, because I don't mean to. By the way, I don't want to ask that question as a finishing question to whitewash this entire discussion to make it about the poor white man. I'm saying it because I see them as a vocal enemy of this movement, and I see them as a large proportion of the population who are being spoken to by the Trumps, and they are also the reason that we must elect a white president, because in order to cater to maybe the ones that are sitting on the fence, but who empathize with the working class white wolf. And I see them being, obviously they're not victims of racism, but the same system, as you say, that oppresses people of color, black, brown people, is the same system that keeps them poor and keeps them feeling so fucked over. And most, I just think that people, if people really understood that, that actually we're all on the same side here. And the issue is that you shouldn't be feeling like you have to work every day of your life and slave for less than minimum wage. You're saying you're wearing that like a badge of honor, but we can have better than that collectively. Everyone around the world can have better than that. Yeah, I mean, I think while I'm sympathetic to the argument, I think the problem is because if you look at how deeply entrenched these ideas are, how the systems are, how things work, and this is where black radicalism kind of departs from Marxism, because Marxism still has this hope that the sleeping beauty, the white working classes in the West will wake up. Radicalism is like, that might happen, but we can't really wait for it to happen, so we'll go and build it. And then when it happens, hopefully everybody will join in. But because how deeply seated these ideas are, at some point you just have to focus on trying to build the alternative, and then hope everybody comes along with it.
Right. Yeah, I was just going to say, I really wanted to get in just like your concluding sentences to your book that I think are really perfect. How you say, but make no mistake, whether spurred by revolution or tipped into collapse under its own weight, the West will eventually fall. Malcolm X was right when he warned that it will be the ballot or the bullet, liberty or death, freedom for everybody or freedom for nobody. So I just think that's so powerful and sums up what you're saying. But do you want to end just by like arguing what's the main crux of your argument that you want to get across, which you've gotten across this entire conversation? But
well, I mean, Andrew Malcolm, I don't know, I can't do any better than Malcolm. I think really it's just revolution is necessary. Yeah. And that's the first thing. Revolution is necessary. You cannot reform this. And as I said before, if we carry on like this, the world's going to end. Like it doesn't really make any sense. And it is time to step back from the brink, and at least support the movements that exist, because there are many people out there making these arguments and building this stuff. We have to. The world can only be as equal as the knowledge that it's built upon, and it's time to really build a completely different set of knowledge.
Revolution time. Woo! Well, thank you so much. I know you're in a rush, and it was just a total joy. You're just so kind and open, and we've learned so much. And thank you from the bottom of our hearts. That was so cool.
Thank you so much. It was an honor to talk with you.
No worries, thank you. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed it.
Thank you
I
so much.
excuse the terrible use of language, but I feel enlightened.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
Thank
super
you very
cool.
much.